They say you should never meet your heroes. I take it one step further. Don't work for them either. I thought answering Ellen DeGeneres' private emails would be the break I'd been waiting for. But by the time I quit, I didn't even recognize myself anymore. And it all started with one message. The first time I saw Ellen in person, it wasn't on stage or at a taping. It was in the hallway, just outside stage B. She was walking with the producer, whispering something too quietly to hear. But what struck me wasn't what she said. It was how everything around her stopped moving. People didn't scatter like they feared her. They didn't bow or flinch. They just paused. One woman froze mid-laugh. A guy holding a boom mic blinked like he'd forgotten where he was. Even the buzzing fluorescence above us seemed to dim slightly when she passed. There was something wrong with the air around Ellen. Like it was too thick, too still. That's hard to explain until you feel it for yourself. It's not just presence, it's pressure. That pressure didn't lift when I started handling her personal inbox. If anything, it got worse. Her emails weren't like normal emails. They didn't arrive with a ding. They just appeared. Sometimes backdated, sometimes undated. And sometimes they vanished entirely after I clicked on them. No trace and sent, no archived version. Just gone. And they weren't all business. One came through with no subject line, no sender, just a single .txt file titled, "Yes." The file was empty. Another was a calendar invite titled, "Midnight North Tunnel." Except we didn't have a North Tunnel. I searched the studio blueprint. Nothing. I tried asking other staffers if they ever got weird invites or untraceable drafts. One researcher gave me a strange look and said, "Don't bring that stuff up. She knows when you talk." At first, I thought he was being paranoid, but the next day, his name was gone from the staff directory. Just gone. Like he'd never been there. And then came the party invitations. The first one was hand-delivered. I didn't even see who dropped it off, just found it sitting on my keyboard when I returned from lunch. Heavy cardstock, no return address. Just 3 lines. Wear black. Bring nothing. Leave different. That night, I stayed at the office past midnight, staring at it. Every time I shifted in my chair, I felt it like a weight in my pocket. The edges felt warm, almost like skin temperature. I told myself I was being dramatic, but deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't an invitation. It was a command dressed like a gift. You think you know what fear feels like. You don't. Not until you see someone you know, someone you've spoken to every day, suddenly turn blank. The night before the party, I was walking toward the soundstage with a segment draft for a Jonas Brothers interview. Ellen had asked for last-minute changes, and I figured I'd leave it on her desk before heading home. That's when I saw her. She was standing completely still in the hallway, arms at her sides, body slightly turned toward the wall. But her face was angled directly at me. Her mouth was half open. Her lips glistened with spit. She was drooling. But it wasn't just that. Her eyes, they were black, not like dark brown or bloodshot. Black, like someone had removed the whites. No glint, no light, just 2 voids staring straight into me. I stopped walking. I couldn't move. Then she spoke, voice lower than I'd ever heard it. We all give in. No emotion, no sarcasm, just certainty.
And then she blinked.
The drool was gone. Her eyes were blue again. She smiled casually, like nothing had happened, and said, "Did you finish the intro for Jennifer yet?" Then walked past me like I was invisible. That night, I barely slept. I told myself I'd imagined it. A hallucination. I'd been overworked. Maybe I needed to take a few days off. But then the party happened. The house was enormous, set deep behind hedges on a canyon ridge. No visible address. The kind of place you couldn't stumble across. You had to be invited, personally. When I got to the gate, it opened on its own. I hadn't even touched the buzzer. There were no cars parked outside, no chatter, no music, just soft gravel beneath my shoes as I walked up the winding drive, lit only by dim amber lights that seemed to flicker every few seconds, like the house was breathing. The door was cracked open. Inside, the air smelled like burnt honey and old paper. And the silence wasn't empty. It was thick, like 100 ears were listening from the walls. I was led down a hallway by a man who didn't speak, just nodded and pointed. Then the room opened, like a stage set waiting for its cue. They were all there, lined up like dolls in a museum. Oprah, Jay-Z, Beyonce, Spielberg, a former US president. They stood still, expressionless, not acknowledging anyone, just watching. Each spaced perfectly, like they'd been placed. And in the center, Ellen. Her suit was black and sharp. Her hands were folded neatly around a porcelain teacup lined with gold. "You made it," she said, smiling with too many teeth. She walked up and handed it to me. "This is your moment. Only the chosen drink." Inside the cup was a golden liquid, thick, slow, swirling unnaturally like it had a mind of its own. It shimmered despite the low light. It moved even though I wasn't. Behind her, the others stepped closer. A half circle, wordless, expectant. Then came the chanting. "Be kind, be kind, be kind." At first, a whisper, then a rhythm, then a roar. I looked at the cup and saw everything I'd ever wanted reflected in the surface. Success, recognition, my name in headlines I hadn't earned. All I had to do was drink. And for a second, I almost did. But something pulled me back. None of them had moved. None had blinked. None had reacted at all. They weren't rooting for me. They were waiting to see if I'd break. I let the cup fall. The sound of it shattering rang like a gunshot. The chanting stopped. Ellen looked down at the spilled gold, then up at me. And she smiled. Not angry, not disappointed, just satisfied, like the game had gone exactly as she wanted. I didn't go back to work after that. I didn't quit. Didn't write a formal resignation. I just disappeared. And no one noticed. There was no HR follow-up, no goodbye email, no box of things. One day, my badge worked, and the next, it didn't. Like the system had already known I wouldn't be returning. I stayed in bed for 3 days straight. Tried to tell myself it wasn't real. But everything felt off. The sunlight looked too white. My apartment smelled like paper, like the house had followed me home. When I finally got the courage to open my laptop, I found an autosave draft in my inbox. One I didn't write. It was blank, except for the subject line. You're ready. No greeting. No signature. Just those 2 words. I closed the laptop and walked out of the apartment barefoot. Weeks passed. I tried freelancing. I took low-paying ghostwriting gigs. But something had been taken from me. I couldn't write the way I used to. My sentences were hollow. My ideas stopped halfway through. It was like I'd left part of myself in that room. Then the others started to change. Writers I knew, ones who had stayed, began popping up in big-budget credits. Talk shows, streaming deals. One guy I used to carpool with was suddenly consulting on a Marvel series. No prior experience, no build-up, just leapfrogged into success. I called him to congratulate. He paused. You should have come to the party when you had the chance. And then he hung up. I stared at my phone for 5 minutes. My reflection in the screen didn't blink. That's when the fear changed shape. It wasn't just about what I'd seen anymore. It was about what I might become if I ever saw it again. It took me a long time to admit to myself that I wasn't just scared, I was haunted. And not by a ghost. Not in the way movies tell you. It wasn't one event. It was the afterimage of something too big to name. I kept telling myself I'd imagined it. That the chanting, the black eyes, the unblinking celebrities, that it had all been an exhausted fever dream. But then something small happened that made everything worse, because it proved I hadn't made any of it up. I went back to the studio lot one day, not for work, just passing by on an errand. I told myself I was fine, that I could handle walking by. But as I approached the gate, I noticed a side building I didn't remember before. A narrow door with a keypad and no signage. I asked the security guard, casually, what it was for. He didn't answer, just looked through me like I hadn't spoken. I waited a moment. Then he said quietly, almost to himself, "You don't want to remember that door." I turned and left immediately. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing something scrape at the edges of my memory. Not a voice, a sound, something mechanical. A low rhythmic hum, like the hallway lights when they flickered. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old notes. Buried deep in my email drafts was something I barely remembered typing. Just 2 lines. Saw it again? Same hallway. Not in the blueprint. I didn't remember writing it, but the timestamp said it was from 2 days before the party. So maybe I had seen it twice. Maybe I'd forgotten on purpose. That's the thing about Hollywood. Sometimes your brain protects you by deleting things you aren't ready to know you saw. But the body remembers. And my body hadn't felt safe since that night. 2 weeks after I first touched the gold-rimmed teacup, another envelope arrived. Not through email. Not in a manila folder from some PA. It was hand-delivered to my apartment. I know that because I never gave my address to anyone at the studio. And yet, it was there, on my doormat one morning, sealed, clean, cream-colored. No name, no return address. Inside, nothing. Or so I thought. It wasn't until I held it under light that I saw it. A faint barely visible watermark pressed into the inside of the flap. It didn't say Ellen's name. It said, "For your approval." All caps, serif font, and underneath that, "Smile first." I checked the envelope front and back again. Nothing else. I didn't know whether to laugh or burn it, but I didn't do either. I tucked it into my desk drawer and tried to forget it. But I could feel it, even when the drawer was closed, like a heartbeat coming from inside the paper. It got worse when I started seeing Ellen again. Not in person, on screens, on bus ads, in YouTube, thumbnails I didn't click. She'd be frozen mid-laugh or walking off stage with that stiff, sharp posture she had in real life. But her eyes would always be looking straight at the lens, not slightly off, not actor's eye line, director. And somehow, always at me. I stopped sleeping with the lights off. Months passed. I moved cities, took temp work at a post-production house. Life was quiet, manageable, but the silence never meant peace. It meant something was waiting. And then, one afternoon, an old coworker texted me out of nowhere. No greeting, no explanation, just one sentence. "She says it's your turn. Again." I blocked the number. The next morning, another envelope showed up. Inside, this one was a matchstick and a folded note. "Burn it if you're sure. But remember, the door doesn't close. It waits." I should have been terrified. I should have thrown everything into a fire and fled. But instead, I sat at my kitchen table for 3 straight hours just staring at the match. Because here's the thing. Once you see the machine behind the illusion, you never stop hearing it run. I didn't want back in. I just wanted to know how close I'd gotten to being replaced. And then it happened. A woman named Stephanie, one of Ellen's former talent liaisons, found me on LinkedIn. Sent a message pretending to ask about freelance work. But at the bottom of her email, in tiny white text that only showed up when highlighted, it said, "You were never supposed to be invited. We set a time to meet in public, but she didn't show. Instead, I got a call. Unknown number." "I left something for you," the voice said. "Backstage, dressing room 2. You still know the code." Click. I don't know why I went, but I did. That room hadn't changed. Same cracked leather chair, same fake orchids, same antique lamp that hummed faintly when turned on. And there, taped to the mirror, was a VHS tape. No case, just the tape, and a sticky note stuck to its label, "The Kindness Pact." The same title Ellen had once whispered in the ballroom. The same name she said held her career. There was no VCR in the room, of course. No way to play it. So I took it home. I stared at it for a week before I finally borrowed a VCR from a thrift store. When I played the tape, it was static for the first few minutes. Then came laughter. Not a studio audience laugh. A deeper kind of sound. Like dozens of people forcing themselves to laugh with their jaws too wide. Then Ellen's face appeared. Not current Ellen. Young Ellen. Early 2000s. She looked into the camera and whispered something I couldn't make out. Then pointed behind her. The camera slowly turned and revealed rows and rows of chairs. Empty. Each one had a name tag. Mine was the only one filled in with ink. My full name, my handwriting. I turned off the TV and vomited. I knew then I'd been watched long before I got the job. And maybe long before I'd ever applied. 2 days after the VHS, I got a call from a blocked number. A cheerful voice, clearly a production assistant, said, "Ellen wants to run a mock segment. Can you be at the studio in 30?" I told them I hadn't worked there in years, and they replied, "She says you'll remember where to sit." I hung up. I should have ignored it. Instead, I went.
The soundstage looked wrong, familiar but off, like a memory you revisit years later and realize all the walls were closer than you remembered. When I walked in, Ellen was already seated in a guest chair.
She grinned. "There he is." I froze at the edge of the carpet. "Let's do something fun today," she said, waving toward the opposite seat. "Pretend you're Taylor Swift." It wasn't a joke. Her eyes were empty, flat gray like worn concrete. Her smile didn't match her voice. I sat down slowly. The cushion was warm. Not recently used warm, like body heat had been sealed inside it. "You're good at staying quiet," she said, leaning forward. "That's what I liked about you. You watch." I didn't speak. She tapped the armrest between us gently. "But you saw something you weren't supposed to." I held my breath. Then she walked to her desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out something that made every part of me lock up.
The envelope.
My envelope. Still sealed. Still dated from years ago. She set it beside a second identical envelope. One I hadn't seen before. "You want to know what I gave up to become Ellen?" she asked. She didn't wait for an answer. She pulled out a third object, a dusty VHS tape labeled "The Kindness Packed" in that same silver marker. Set it gently between the two envelopes like it was sacred. "In 2001, I had nothing," she said. "No bookings, no audience, just rage. And then one night, he came." She didn't explain who he was. She didn't need to. I already knew. Ellen sat back down. Her knees almost touched mine. Her voice dropped. "Do you believe me?" I hesitated. "I think I'm tired," I whispered. "I think my head's playing tricks on me." She didn't move, didn't react, just slid one of the envelopes forward. Inside was a printed resignation letter, typed, dated, signed. I hadn't written it, but it had my name, my font preferences, my signature digitally scanned. She smiled. "It's better when people don't believe." Then she started humming. That same sound I'd heard in the hallway all those months ago. The not quite a song, just a sound that followed you home. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't pack up my locker. I didn't argue. Security met me outside the door. One nod, no words. Just a silent escort off the lot like I'd never been there. Years passed. I moved cities again, switched numbers, deleted social media. told people I'd left the industry by choice, said I was doing content strategy for furniture brands. But I still had the envelope. I moved it from desk drawer to shoebox to kitchen cabinet. I never opened it. Told myself I didn't need to, that it was better to not know. Then last year, Netflix dropped a teaser for Ellen's new stand-up special.
In the final scene, she sat alone in a dark studio. No crowd, no laughter, just silence.
She looked into the camera and whispered, "The thing about kindness is that it was always just a trick."
Then the screen cut to black. That night, I opened the envelope.
Inside was the same resignation letter I'd seen years earlier. Typed, signed, dated. Only this time, a post-it note was attached. It said, "Thank you for your time." I sat there for hours reading it over and over until the truth hit me harder than anything else ever had. There was never a choice. There was no moment where I could have said the right thing. The party, the chant, the cup, the hallway, it was all an act. The real trick wasn't to convert me. It was to make me wonder if I'd failed. To make me question myself until I broke. Because that's the power the trickster feeds on. Not your obedience, but your guilt.